Biotech investors are still getting banged up out there, but some analysts are pointing to recovery on the back half of this year and into Q1 2023. When we see markets moving for better or for worse, and when we want to understand what's going on, and importantly, what a biopharma leaders to do about it, there's one guy we're quick to call. I'm Matt Pillar. You're listening to the Business of Biotech, and I'm happy, as I always am, to bring you consulting, CFO, special advisor, board member, and all-around asset to the biopharma community, Allan Shaw. This is a timely conversation with Allan because while much of the small to mid-sized bio industry has kind of curled up into a ball to conserve resources of late, Allan recently played a hand in some all too rare of late M&A activity, helping Portage Biotech acquire Tarus Pharmaceuticals and adding a handful of candidates to an already deep rooted pipeline along the way. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some market forecasts. And here with me in the studio is Allan. Allan, welcome. It's great to see you.
Good morning, Matt. Great to see you again, and great to be back on the show. Some people have been suggesting that you should get me a jacket like Saturday Night Live, for the number of times that I've been on.
It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. I was actually thinking about it this morning. I was thinking, why don't I just you want to do this weekly with me? We could co-host. You could add color commentary and probably ask much smarter questions of my guests than I do. If you want to devote the time, tell the folks at Portage you're just going to need a couple more hours a week to record with Matt.
Yeah, I'm flattered, and I would love to talk a little bit more offline with you on how we can jump in the sandbox on a more frequent basis. It's fun.
Up the frequency a bit for sure. So I want to start out talking about the bigger trend, and we've had plenty of conversations about this, but it's an ever-changing landscape around M&A. M&A, as I said, it's all but dried up in the first half of the year. You recently sent me a deck. What's another great thing about you? I always appreciate the insider information. I shouldn't say that. It's not really insider, but the valuable information that you send me on what's going on out there. But you sent me a deck from a NASDAQ presentation that really put a fine point on it. I think it estimated like 80 deals worth somewhere around 300 million in 2019 that have contracted this year to fewer than 40 small deals valued at around 40 million at this point in the year. So obviously a big contraction there. What's contributing to that dearth?
It's a question that has a lot of people scratching their heads. And I think like a broken watch, eventually, it will tell the right time. And it's, again, dumbfounding a little bit when you think about all the money that pharma is sitting on, particularly, the windfalls from COVID. So there is a lot of money in the system. But with that said, I think there's been a number of different things that have contributed to the slowdown. I don't think it just happened this year. I think if you looked at it over the last several years, it's definitely has dropped off. And a lot of people, if you recall our conversation at the beginning of the year, a lot of people were speculating that might be the catalyst that will help turn the market around in 2022. And we really haven't seen that. I mean, there have been some deals. The Biohaven deal with Pfizer was really, I think, the largest one so far this year. There hasn't been any real mega deals other than something like that. A lot of smaller deals. So that's still waiting. And I think at the end of the day, there's at least two sides, maybe three sides to every story. And certainly I think the other side of that is that from a buyer's perspective, whether the price is X or the price is B, it doesn't matter if there's a sale on something that's not proven. And I think most of the folks want to be able to, are more than willing to overpay for something that's been clinically validated. I think what we've seen is there's been a lot of emphasis on early stage of development. That's what kind of the last stage of the IPO wave was, really companies that probably weren't ready or should have come to market. So there's a lot of things in the system that just aren't ripe, right? It's I think that the expression I heard someone use the other day was that there's a lot of apples out there, but they're not ripe.
Yeah.
And if you've eaten an unripened apple, they don't taste very good. So I think there's a lot of things that it's on us in the industry to kind of answer the important questions, validate these things. And it doesn't matter whether it was $2 billion yesterday and today at $100 million, it's a bargain. If it's unproven, it's unproven. And I think you also see a lot of high profile M&A transactions that have really sputtered, have failed.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody wants to necessarily extend themselves or expose themselves or take risks until things are proven. So I think that's one of the gating factors. I think there's also other considerations as well. I also think the fact that the market had been red hot and valuations may have gone in front of themselves has impacted people's psyche across the spectrum. From what I hear, the boards are probably the last ones to get the memo on a lot of this.
Yeah.
And so therefore, a lot of people are looking at yesterday's valuations. They're looking in their rearview mirror, and they're thinking that they can, hold out. And you can't always hold out, right? And I think you're now starting to see deals that are being done more in a distressed manner, where companies are just looking for ways to save the dream, right? It's kind of like akin to running out of gas. And if a car comes by that you want to get into, you can get to your destination at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It may not be the way you wanted to, it may not be the style you wanted to, but you're going to get there. And I think people are in different phases of that. It's almost like, I don't want to say this, the phases you go through when you're going through somebody who knows that they're terminally ill. Initially there's denial, then there's bitterness, and then there's acceptance. I think we're somewhere between acceptance and bitterness in terms of where the operators are right now, and maybe even a little denial. And I think that's reflecting itself. And it's really an interesting dynamic. And they're not helping themselves as they're running out of gas in their gas tank. It's actually working the wrong way. If you look at where your positions are, you're much better suited to negotiate with somebody with a full tank of gas, or to raise money with a full tank of gas. And if you look at the valuations associated with financing, with money or without money, and the nature of those transactions, the structure involved, it's night and day. And it's the same thing. People are waiting, sitting around for a better deal, and that deal is not necessarily coming. So it's a combination of equilibrium, I think, in short, defining the balance of people who understand or in touch with their masculine side and feminine side, and understand where they are in their development, where they are in terms of their balance sheet. Balance sheets matter. And on the flip side, scientifically, can you answer the important scientific questions? Because pharma or big biotech or even medium biotech are going to want to be able to get behind that. And I think a really important question, and maybe this is the litmus test that we hold, and maybe we can use this as we progress in the course of the conversations, is one of the questions, whether it's an investor or a would-be strategic suitor.
Mm-hmm.
If you were able to get the asset for free, would you be willing to invest in it? And right now, I think the answer is no, right? When you see over 200 companies having negative enterprise values out there, the market is saying, we don't want to invest in that.
Yeah.
So, that begs the question that begs very important questions. And there'll be different answers depending on each company. There's going to be circumstantial questions. I don't think you can generalize in that setting.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, lots of analogies there. I think about there was a time for quite some time. My daughter showed horses. So we ended up buying a couple of horses, and I learned during that time that it was the free ones that you had to be concerned about. The old saying, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. it's like an analogy to a health check on the horse. If a horse is gifted to you, you don't look it in the mouth. That's offensive. But those are actually the horses you do want to look in the mouth, the ones that are free. So yeah, little side country analogy there. But I'm curious, it just can't be an across the board no, right? Like if you can acquire the technology for free or for cheap, but it's got that two of those things you mentioned earlier, maybe some promise of proven, maybe it's proven, maybe it promises to be proven, maybe it's just, good sound technology, or it's got some backing already, the valuation's there in whatever form that might take. Like, there have to be still safe bets, right? Or
safe bets
is relative, right? That's a terrible cliche, but you get it, right? I know it's relative.
No, there's things that are very novel, and then there's things that are somewhat clinically validated. So, and I think when people look at things, they look at, do they take novelty in terms of delivery? Do they take novelty in mechanism? Do you take novelty in target? And I think the way you try to manage that is, you generally try to, at least at Portage, we try to reduce the target risk. Mm-hmm. We look at validated targets, and I think that improves your probability of success. But there's different ways to be able to deliver it and approach it. So, you can break down your risk tolerance, but I think biotech is certainly not for the faint of heart. Yeah. Kind of like a baseball player. Actually, it's even less, right? A baseball player, if you get 3 hits out of 10, you get to the Hall of Fame. Yeah. I think in biotech, you can bat 1 out of 10, and you're probably going to get, if you get enough at bats, you're going to make it to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you brought up Portage. I want to dig in there a little bit. What's it been? 2 years? 2 years since
a little over 2 years now. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow, time flies. So yeah, a couple of years now serving as CFO at Portage. And as I mentioned earlier, in July, you guys bucked this trend with an acquisition of Tarus Pharmaceuticals. You picked up 2 of its clinical stage and 2 of its preclinical assets in that deal. And I was hoping that we could sort of juxtapose this greater trend of curling up in a ball and just trying to preserve, whatever cash runways left until the purse strings get loosened up a little bit more. Juxtapose kind of that bigger trend with what's going on at Portage, because you've been on a roll. You had an IPO. What was that? When did you guys go public? Was that a year ago yet?
Company's been actually public for a number of years, but they're on the Canadian exchange. We uplisted them to NASDAQ a little over a year ago. Yeah. And we did an institutional round of financing just as the markets were collapsing. Really, it was the end of last June. So yep. I kind of felt like we were on a burning bridge when we got that transaction done. Yeah. But the important part was we did get the transaction done. And I think that was important because we capitalized the company, and we had a runway that takes us going into the Tarus transaction, which allowed us to pick up some really interesting adenosine assets, arguably best in class. So we wanted to be able to, so we had a position of strength financially. We had the flexibility to develop what we had, but it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, even if you can get the assets for free, which they weren't free, we did exchange some shares and assume some liabilities, but all told, we were quite satisfied that for $21 million all in, much of it in stock, so it didn't impact our financial runway. We were able to pick up 4 assets, 2 of them ready to go into the clinic. So they're highly relevant, and we'll be able to generate data in the near term. And so the real question on that was, developing and how do you develop these things? Because we want to maintain our runway. I think it's important. I can't emphasize the importance more of managing your runway. And in this market environment, it's the number 1 metric that everyone's looking at. So in order to solve for the desire to pick up assets at a compelling price. I think strategically we feel that this is a generational opportunity to pick up technology right now. We do think people are throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And this,
it's interesting you say that, because one of the questions that was rolling around in the back of my head, and I want to get right back to the discussion around Portage's acquisitions, but one of the questions rolling around in the back of my head when you were talking about, proven technologies and valuation and projects, and this notion that there's a lot out there that you could get for free, but you wouldn't take any of it. One of the questions rolling around the back of my head was, do you, or are there folks in the space who maybe aren't as invested in specific transactions as you are, who express any concern around what is being lost right now? I had I did an interview not too long ago with the CEO of a company called Spring Therapeutics. His name's Richard Francis, and I remember him telling me that he was telling me about how he came to be in the position that he's in at Spring, and he knew he wanted to go lead an emerging company, and he was looking for the perfect opportunity, and he had these criteria, and one of the criteria was great science. Well, no brainer, right? You got to have great science. The other one was a platform technology on which a pipeline could be built, which I'm sure resonates well with Portage. And then the third was sound financial backing, which they had as well. But the first part, that sound science, he said, that was the thing that was coming in spades in 2020-ish when he decided to make this move, leave big bio to go lead a startup. He's like, there's great science everywhere. There's great science popping up all over the map. Technology's enabling it. Computational biology is enabling it. Like, we're learning more and discovering great science all over the place. And yet, in this unfortunate turn of events, we've spent the last 18 months, 24 months having a hard time funding that great science. So is there concern like that there are great opportunities out there, not just for the business, but for patients that are, to your point, being tossed out with the bathwater?
I think there's been a lot of concern. I think generally speaking, I think people feel that, the money will eventually find the good science. But I think, as a good friend puts it, the pendulum never stops in the middle. So you're going to have exaggerated moments. And I think right now it's a little exaggerated. So there are some opportunities that you can pick things up. I mean, you referenced, the Fierce Biotech article about Portage in terms of how they, equated it to pillaging and plundering. And, that
was before we started recording. So real quick, Alan, just a little frame of reference there. I was commenting to Alan how I was amused by Fierce Biotech's coverage of the Tarus acquisition, because, I've had Ian on this show. I've talked to him several times, and he's a wonderful person and a very peaceful man. And he made a funny LinkedIn post where he was sort of taken aback by the Fierce's use of the words like pillage and plunder in their description of what Portage was doing with these Tarus pharmaceutical assets in this acquisition. And it made me want to ask you, Alan, whether or not Ian, went and burned the CEO's house down when he was done with the acquisition. What kind of shape was Tarus left in? But yeah,
it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, yes, there's no way, the ifs, ands, and buts around it. It was an opportunistic transaction. But, it was a company that we were familiar with. We knew a lot of the board members on many different levels. So we were familiar with what they were doing. And they were also quite familiar with us and our drug development chops. And it comes back to betting on the jockey, and they wanted to put their asset in the hands of where they thought the value could be unlocked. They had confidence in our access to capital, our ability to develop, our relationships. They also saw that they liked the access to our lead program, because again, it was diversifying them besides a vehicle for unlocking and creating value. And then lastly, in relative to our pipeline, the biological synergy with our iNKTs also works very well. And it's also very complementary to our whole thesis of really taking advantage of the $30 billion and growing checkpoint market. and really feel that there's huge opportunity to combine and continue to improve upon the outcomes that checkpoints provide today, because they, relatively speaking, only scratch the surface. So it made this checked all of our boxes. And unlike the INKT program that we have, which is novel, first in class, best in class, small molecule, this adenosine really speaks to something that isn't as novel. It's certainly clinically validated. Biologically, I think everyone agrees that it should have a real impact on cancer. People haven't yet figured out the secret handshake yet. So we certainly feel that in this case, it's a little bit like race car driving, and that we're drafting behind those who came before us, and we can learn a lot and be informed and not make the same mistakes and effectively pass in front of them. And when you look at the pharmaceutical properties of the profile of the compounds, these are arguably best in class. So we're quite excited by having a best in class asset, learning from those who preceded us, and also having the full spectrum of the adenosine that we allow us to combine and titrate them together. Coupled further with Ian and the team's drug development chops, where we're looking forward to the prospect of really unlocking the power of the adenosine pathway and hopefully impact cancer patients in the future. So that's the aim. So to your concern about whether things are being missed, they'll be picked up eventually. I think it really speaks to time to market and where they are. I think things that are more clinically advanced, such as the assets that we picked up, where we're going to be able to generate data within a year, and that they have INDs, those are really way more attractive. Things that are earlier on, that's going to require more of an investment. That's one that fits behind things, but it's not something that people are necessarily interested in today. So that's going to take a little bit more love, and will really also beg the question of, is it worth your investment? Of course, the earlier stage products don't cost as much. So, you can kind of put them on the stove on a slow simmer while you focus on other things.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The Business of Biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Yeah, that leads me to another side question, as I'm prone to do, and it may be a completely naive question, but it's one I've never asked you, and I'm curious about it. So I look at Portage's pipeline, and as I mentioned earlier, it's incredibly deep. It's deep and growing. A combination of Ian the drug hunt, the pillaging and plundering drug hunters acquisition strategy, and the company's own drug development chops. But I don't know. I haven't looked in a while, but I'm going to venture a guess. Dozens, right? A few dozen candidates like listed on this on the pipeline across multiple modalities. What, like, is it a thing where, in addition to acquiring and kind of dovetailing, jointing acquired assets with existing assets, figuring out where they fit together, having a strategy, is it a thing to, like, eventually down the road for a company like Portage to say, well, you know what, at this point in our continuum, it might make sense to offload some assets, right? Like maybe these don't play as well anymore in our long-term portfolio strategy, or we don't have the resources to dedicate them, and they be pushed further downfield with someone else. Is that a thing? Is that ever part of a strategy?
No, it's a solid, insightful observation. With the decision to acquire the adenosine assets, we made a resource allocation decision at that point because of relevancy. We saw that this was something that we can put into the clinic. One of the programs can go in by the end of the year, another one next year once we get the drug supply. So we saw something that we can actually create value, de-risk a lot sooner. We had another program in our pipeline that we liked a lot. We still do. But because of its relative complexity to manufacture, it was going to take a lot more time to get to an IND and then do the phase 1 and then the proof of concept studies. So we thought effectively in half the time, we could spend a similar quantum of money and have advanced programs that are going to be in the clinic, that'll be turning over data that investors care about. So that was a real life example of resource allocation. And I think that's something that's really important right now. You need to be able to constantly reallocate and focus on what's relevant and what's going to move the needle as you continue to execute and then finance yourself bridge yourself over to the next inflection point. So in the case that I called out, the one that we relegated, unlike your family where you love all your kids the same, I guess when it comes to the pipeline, we do have favorites, and in that respect, the one that we don't view as I guess we're not conveying as much love to right now is one that we're encouraging and looking at possibly raising money externally. And we're letting the folks leading that program and we're helping them do that. And that's something that we're certainly open to. But it's really our primary goal is to, to have full control over these things and the status of where we are with them. We prioritize, and again, in the spirit of developing good drugs and impacting patients, if we don't prioritize it, we will look to see how we can kind of continue to move its development forward, just at a slower pace. Sure.
Yeah. Sounds like Joe might be home. I think I hear the puppies barking in the background.
Yes, I do apologize for that background noise, but yes, I think she is.
If you don't, if you don't like dogs, I don't have time for it. So if you don't like the dogs barking in the background right now, you can just go check out another podcast. All right, gotta keep things moving here though, because I know we're going to run short on time. So I want to get back to that NASDAQ deck that you sent me and ask you a couple questions about that. As I said, it referenced, the potential for a turnaround this fall and into 2023. The analysts there had some assessment of what needs to happen or what they anticipate will happen to drive that turnaround. I'm curious about your take though. What has to happen? For that to happen, what has to happen in your mind?
It's I saw that too, and I kind of asked myself a similar question. What are they thinking? I think there's people in two different camps, and I think there were people who wrote off 2022 going into it, and I think there were people who were hoping that as we turned the calendar and went into 22, it would suddenly be a new year, a reset, and people would be happy. I think a lot of people who were the ones who were thinking that things would be better in the first half of the year are now simply kicking the can and hoping the second half of the year will be happier days. And I think the fact that we are seeing in the markets right now, the XBI has been up almost 30% in the last month, I think gives people some hope. From the traders and the investors that I've been speaking to, I still think people are holding their breath a little bit, that this is maybe a little bit of a head fake. I think some people are saying they're seeing it more from the retail and other people who've hopped in based on all the commentary on the biotech market being sold off a little bit. I'm not necessarily seeing strong conviction on the part of the fundamental investors. You're seeing some deals getting done. Again, they seem to be a bit expensive. So it's to be determined. I think the companies that will do better are going to be the ones with stronger runways that are funded into 24 and 25. I think market caps of north of $500 million will do better. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be, again, tough for the smaller cap markets. And I think there's going to be the winners and the losers. Yeah. And I was at an investment conference last week, and one of the prevailing themes, there were a few. One was certainly an emphasis on the jockeys, an emphasis on the balance sheet, an emphasis then on technology, but they placing efficiency, resource allocation, and relevancy in all those points. But the overriding comment that they said and emphasized is that there's just too many companies out there and they have to go away.
Yeah, it's a hard message to hear for some. I mean, obviously, like that was you talk about what investors are looking for, and I've heard you and I have had this discussion before on multiple occasions. This idea that advanced clinical programs, the proven part, right? Some proven science. I think even more specifically, I've read, if you're phase 2, 3, that puts you in a safer place. But the other big thing being the 2-year cash runway, and I'm sure that measure probably, might ebb and flow a little bit depending on what the markets are doing. But 2 years of cash, phase 2 clinical asset, if you have those things, yeah, you got a pretty good fighting chance of maintaining the flow. So the hard question is, you just mentioned it, what if I have one of those two things, but not the other? Or what if I have neither of those? If I have neither of those two things, am I one of those companies that just shouldn't be around?
It's going to be tough. Your cost of capital is going to get very expensive. So funding is going to get very tough. So there's going to be a lot of, I think investors are really starting to discern, going through the rubble right now and looking at what's relevant and what's not. So I think having something that's human proof of concept is important. People kind of want to reduce one risk. And if you have that, that's helpful. But not having a runway puts you in a very uncomfortable position too. So, to your question, if you have one and not the other, you're more fortunate than those who have neither. But it's not going to be easy. I think you manage. I think it's a question of your cost of capital. How much warrants are you giving up? What is the price? And I think the thing that people have to really focus on, because I think this is where people are getting hurt, is that when they raise money as a preclinical company, or even if you're an early clinical, you're not necessarily taking money down to, you're not bridging yourself to a data point. And you need to bridge yourself somewhere. If you get stuck, you're really, you're not, what can I tell you? You might as well put a kick me sign on your back. And I think there are a lot of people or companies that have found themselves bridged to nowhere. And that's really the problem. And you're starting to see companies slowly just shut the shutter up at the end of the day. So it's going to be interesting. But for people who find themselves in that position, or people's runways are dwindling, and there's a lot of them, we're all in that boat, right? Every biotech company has a dwindling runway. It's just a question of the quantum. Is you don't go broke from dilution, and I think if you are going to sit around hoping the market's going to turn around, I think you're setting yourself up for a problem. I think people who are sitting around waiting for sunny days and not controlling their destiny are going to be potentially setting themselves up for a surprise. I think it's better to kind of grab the bull by the horns and figure a way out. There's got to be a way to collaborate, find, similar to the transaction we just did, get yourself connected to an entity that can unlock the value of what you're working on, and help impact patients and take your dream to fruition. But it's going to be different paths that are going to have to be taken. I think it's, we just have too many people right now on the island, and we need to, that needs to be rationalized. And I think going back to the NASDAQ question, the way I see it, we have had a hell of a party for almost over a decade in biotech. Anyone who's been to a really good party, you're going to have a hangover, and we're living through one right now.
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned, just a couple more questions for you, Alan, and then I'll let you go. One of the things that you mentioned just now was around, your strategy. I don't know. It's almost like you sit in a comfortable place to talk about longer term developmental and pipeline development strategy, because as I said, at least at Portage, there's a pretty awesome track record there. We've used the term shots on goal many times, and Portage has a lot of them. Multiple indications, multiple modalities and approaches to those indications. Looking at it from that lens, looking at the market from that lens, like let's say, one of your plays, perhaps one of your levers that you can adjust to ride out the rest of the storm and perhaps get yourself in a better position to be, secure financing once purse strings loosen up. One lever is just that, like the indications you're pursuing, the markets you're going after. So just give me some perspective on that. Like we know that oncology still owns like nearly half the attention of all small to mid cap bios. Oncology owns like as much as neurology, infectious disease, hematology, ophthalmology, immunology, psychiatry, on and on it goes. Like it's as big a market as all these other ones combined. Is that just the de facto standard and will be for some time? That's your safe bet? Or are there other areas, disease areas that perhaps will create or provide opportunity in the short term?
No, it's what the market is right now. If you look at drug approvals, oncology and orphan diseases seem to really dominate that typically, and so the pipeline that supports the promotion of those programs naturally follows suit. And I think that in itself speaks to that oncology and rare diseases are arguably much more capital efficient than some of the other diseases, the other pathologies that you referenced. And because of that, smaller patient sets, biomarkers, commercialization, there's a whole bunch of areas that are just a lot more efficient, I think has led a lot to that. Neurology recently, there has been a serious emphasis there. I think the risks of development, going back to safe or non-safe in biotech, I would certainly put the neurology side of the equation as a higher degree of risk. Apologize for the dog. I realize my landscapers outside, so
that was going to
persist for a while.
What's the dog's name, Alan?
His name is Boo Boo.
Boo Boo. What if you brought Boo Boo in? What if you let Boo Boo? Would he bark in your lap, or would Boo Boo quiet down and smile for the camera?
My sense is, until I acknowledge the fact that he's trying to save the house from the intruder of the landscaper, he'll continue to. He's going to continue. I could try to clap for him to come up and see if he can come up.
Let's see, Boo Boo. Bring Boo Boo in. I want Boo Boo to be my guest on the Business of Biotech podcast.
Hey, Boo Boo.
No, we're retrieving Boo Boo.
Get up here now. Get up here. Come on. Everyone's hearing about you. Get in here.
Yeah,
Get
and
in
for
here,
those of you who
boo-boo.
are unaware, these podcasts are almost always filmed, available on YouTube and available on our website at bioprocessonline.com. So you can watch the action in addition to listen to it. Boo Boo is a much bigger dog than I anticipated Boo Boo being. I mean, Boo Boo sounded like, I was thinking like, Bichon or something, but what is this?
This is a golden doodle.
Oh, light colored. I don't know that I've seen one that's quite that white. She is a lover. Look at her hug you. For him.
He's a pal. He's a really good guy.
Oh man, that's awesome. He's beautiful. How old is he?
He's about 6 now.
6, yeah. Well, good boy, Boo Boo. Can you hear me? Boo's like, who's talking to me, Dad?
he can definitely hear you. I guess he's happy to be in my arms right now.
Yeah. Well, he's welcome on the show anytime. Anytime.
Oh, you're a star now, Boo Boo.
Yeah, Boo Boo's the star. All right, one more. I'm gonna hit you with one more, and then I'm gonna let you. I know you got a call coming up here.
No problem. I'm sorry if we didn't. I'm not sure if we answered your question before, but
Well, I think you did. You gave me some good insight into beyond why oncology is what it is, and beyond that, a couple of. I don't want to use the word safe. There's no safe bet, but I get it.
But I think if you peel the onion on that, you'll see that, again, from an industry perspective, the capital allocation is overly redundant. I think if you look at people, do we need 20 PD-L1s? Do we need everybody hitting all these different targets? They're doing the same thing. So, that would be a really classical example, if the industry tried to rationalize the resources that we have collectively, we can stop some of the redundant efforts that are only cannibalizing good science as well.
Yeah. So one last big, kind of high level 30,000 foot view question I want to get your take on, and that's specific to biologics, right? So in this bear market for biotechs in general, the cost and time and resource intensive nature of developing a large molecule therapy takes on a risk factor of its own, right? When money's hard to come by, and you're saying, yeah, I mean, I'm not looking to build an Escort here. I'm building a Ferrari, and I need more of it. I need more time. I need more money. You're in a particularly, I guess, risky place. But at the same time, everyone acknowledges the potential miraculous nature of large molecules. We've developed some amazing monoclonal antibodies, vaccines that have done wonderful things. Like, there's no question the value is there. What kind of a predicament does that put me in if I'm not Portage and I don't have a multimodality, very deep and rich pipeline where perhaps I can shift my attention to a far more efficient project for the time being? I guess what kind of position does that put me in if I'm biologic only? And do you see, give us sort of a longer term forecast on whether, right now, I think it's like some small percentage of prescription drugs that are the expense of some small percent of prescription drugs, biologics outweighs small molecule, yet it's only like, 2%, I think, of patients actually receive monoclonal antibodies. So there's a huge dichotomy there, right? Those things are way off base. So what's it going to take for, I'm using a lot of words, but I guess ultimately the question is to get to a point where if I'm a developer of biologics, there's some level of stability and predictability around my development cost and timeline and funding. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm making sense here, but I'm trying to, when are things going to kind of balance out, and what's it going to take to kind of get there?
Yeah, the question you pose is kind of like, small molecules versus some of the other modalities out there in terms of complexity, irrelevancy, time to market. And while I'd say small molecules are kind of viewed as old fashioned, right? If you're going to artificially draw a line between pharmaceuticals and biologics, you generally draw a line around small molecules, I think was the rule of thumb.
Mm-hmm.
I think that line has really been blurred, and biopharmaceuticals is probably the right way, because you've got big traditional pharma companies selling antibodies, and you've got small biologic companies selling small molecules. So it doesn't follow suit really anymore. But I think your question or observation is very relevant, particularly in this market. I think when there's a high tide, it becomes less relevant. Still important, but I think right now, smaller molecules are generally simpler than the complexity associated with more complex modalities. Antibody production is certainly much more costly and elongated. You get into cell or gene therapy, that's a whole nother kettle of fish as well. So, that generally increases time to clinic, going back to some of the other points that we're talking about. And I think being relevant is important now, because there's an opportunity cost for investors. Why would somebody invest in you today if you're not going to have clinical data or human proof of concept for 2 years, when they can invest in someone else who will have it in 6 months or a year from now? They could ultimately trade out of that trade after they hit, and then go into your story, because there's no catalyst to move you along. So therefore, small molecules are certainly have some benefit in terms of how quickly you can develop them. Again, I think we've spoken about, when you talk about RNAi, they're arguably a lot more predictable than say small molecules. So you might pick up time on the regulatory end of it versus where you might save it on the production side of it, just as an illustrative example. I also think something that's not inconsequential, because at the end of the day, valuations are all underpinned based on revenue, projected revenue, and market share. And I think small molecules, by the nature of what they are less complex and less costlier. So therefore, they should be cheaper than the more expensive, costly other modalities that we mentioned. And I think from that vantage point, you're going to be able to have better patient access, and you can impact patients, penetrate that and reach them, to those that need it much readily, when you have a lower cost of entry at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting here just amazed that you gave such a beautiful and thorough answer to a question that I had a difficult time articulating. It's as if you knew exactly what I wanted to ask you, despite the fact that the question wasn't coming out of my head the same way that it went into my head. I appreciate that.
Well, maybe we should play basketball. I'll know when to pass the ball to you.
Yeah, I'll see it coming without looking. Well, Allan, I know we're short on time here, and you've got a call coming up, and we need to wrap things up. But I always appreciate these discussions. Again, I mean, it's just, there's always insight, and if you listen to Allan's responses to my questions, there's a lot to hear. There's a lot to learn, a lot to take away, and that's why we appreciate you, Allan.
Well, it's always fun to play ball with you, and look forward to doing it again, and wishing everybody a great summer. Yeah, same to you. Looks like summer's been treating you pretty well, so keep that up. There's only so much of it to go around. It's a finite resource. Indeed, time's the enemy. Thanks, Allan. Be well. So that's Allan Shaw with a guest appearance from Boo Boo Shaw. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva, which demonstrates its support for the leaders of early stage biopharma companies at cytiva.com/
emerging biotech. Check that site out. Visit us at bioprocessonline.com, where you can subscribe to my newsletter. And if you're enjoying these conversations with the innovative minds of biotech, subscribe to the pod. Leave us a review. And as always, thanks for listening.